Starting this interview today, there's so much to discuss. The nation has seen a lot in this last few days. Starting the show, I have to address the biggest news right now that's affecting so many communities nationwide. The death of George Floyd, and how he died in the hands of the Minneapolis police officer, and the protests that we have seen nationwide, from peaceful demonstrations to riots and looting. I have to ask you, as an assemblyman who works in legislation, your comments on it. And, when you look at these protests and the way the nation is reacting, how should we understand this?
Sure. It's a crossroads. We're at a crossroads in our country. The fact that we are seeing horrific videos like the murder that we've all seen now in this day and age in 2020. On the one hand, it's horrific. On the other, people feel that their voices have not been heard. And it all goes hand in hand, right? It's folks from minority communities, Black Americans who are essential workers, who don't have the opportunity to stay home, even if, depending on their age, if they have pre-existing health conditions. People of color already experience bias in terms of disparate access to healthcare or at healthcare facilities once they are looking to be treated or tested for COVID-19. There's a higher prevalence of chronic health conditions. So it all goes hand in hand. And in the middle of the pandemic, the fact that young Black men can't walk down the street without feeling that their lives are at risk, could be at risk, it's unconscionable. And we have to do better as a country. And this is an opportunity. This is a teaching moment for all of us, because enough is enough. So I think in terms of everything that we're dealing with right now,
right.
That this would happen is really unfortunate. But my heart goes out to the families, all of the families of folks who were killed untimely. And unfortunately, those officers don't represent the vast majority of our uniformed heroes in blue. They don't. I know a lot of cops. I'm friends with a lot of cops. I served in the Marines with a lot of law enforcement officers. And they are overwhelmingly decent-hearted, hardworking men and women who are taking risks every day to protect the rest of us. And we've seen lots of heartwarming stories in the aftermath of the law enforcement community standing with our Black brothers and sisters throughout America in peacefully protesting all that's wrong and standing for the notion that Black lives matter. But unfortunately, you have a fringe minority that is doing a disservice to their uniforms.
Over 20 states have a curfew going on right now due to these demonstrations that have gone really violent. You have, the president also saying that he's going to deploy the National Guard. My question to you is, as a father and as a South Asian, how do we address this to our kids? And also, how do we address it to the youth that is, living in this country, and they're growing up here, and they are, the minority community? How do we, have this conversation right now?
Yeah. So as South Asian Americans, I think we can always draw inspiration from Mahatma Gandhi and from Dr. King. And on the one hand, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And it's an adage that we must instill in our children. And we also have to ensure that they understand that peaceful civil protest is the way in which we will eventually achieve these ends. What's happening, what we're seeing in terms of the violence and the looting, that is not widespread. Right? These are fringe elements. And this is a discrete minority of folks. And they're not protesters, right? These are opportunists. These are folks that would be committed to violence anyway. Robbing stores is doing nothing for Mr. Floyd's memory. So these are fringe elements. They're trying to distract from the issues that are actually at hand, that the vast majority of protesters are committed to seeing through in a peaceful act of protest. And I think President Obama and First Lady Obama have spoken very eloquently about that topic. And I think we just have to keep our eye on the prize and not be distracted by fringe elements that are committing criminal acts, because they're not the real protesters and they don't represent the vast majority of protesters.
Right. And this entire process has definitely bring up, the conversation of systemic racism, which exists in the nation, and, its interaction with police brutality, another topic that we all talk about. My question to you is, as somebody who works on legislation a lot, what is needed out of the law right now in order to get some peace, in order to get some answers to what is happening and how can we really combat it? Right now we're talking about these protests. My question to you is, what after these protests? What do we really need in our system?
I don't think legislation is going to be enough. That doesn't mean that policies that ensure blacks and browns are locked up disproportionately for offenses that are committed at a similar rate by their white counterparts should be the order of the day. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at our criminal justice system to ensure that any imbalance is corrected. That doesn't mean that the laws and the policies that promote systemic racism or that we can't deal with and escalate the gradation of how we treat bias crimes in different states, which we've done, I think, a good job of in New Jersey.
Right.
All that's true. But we're not going to be able to legislate away hate. We're not going to be able to legislate away racism. We're not going to be able to legislate what's in people's hearts. What's in people's hearts, what's in people's minds. The idea that we have taken racism, discrimination, biases, prejudices that were previously, I think, really thought of as being on the fringe,
Right.
made it more okay to be in the mainstream and to talk openly on social media or otherwise about these horrific views that people have. This hatred coming out into the open, that is very distressing. And there's a lot of damage that I think we need to repair in our country. There's polarization. We see that in our politics. We see that at our dinner tables. And I think that that can't be legislated away. For us to heal as a nation, we're going to have to understand each other's perspectives. We're going to have to understand the experience of young Black Americans growing up in this country. And we're going to have to, I think, to heal as a nation, we're really going to have to look at the soul of our country and think about what it means. Think about the responsibility that all of us have in shaping our future. It's a very difficult time.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I need to discuss a lot on COVID-19 as well with you, but I'll ask you a last question in this topic because, you know, this is the biggest news right now. It's really impacting so many, members of the community, and it's such a sad news. My question to you would be, what do you think is the role and responsibility of South Asians right now in advocating for this voice? And I'd also like for you to give a message out to protesters that are marching in different parts of the nation. I think it's important for them to hear from a leader such as you, in what you think should be happening when they are advocating their voice.
Sure. Because I think as South Asian Americans, we share the same responsibility as every American right now. White, black, brown, yellow, ideologically red or blue. It's to understand what our brothers and sisters, our neighbors, our friends are going through. We may have experienced discrimination ourselves as South Asian Americans. This is about something different. This is about your life being in jeopardy or being fearful of that when you're pulled over. And this is about ensuring that we are championing the notion that Black Lives Matter, that we are participating, that it matters as much to every other diaspora community or every other community of Americans, just as it does to Black folks in America right now. So whether that is by protesting, whether that's by writing to your lawmakers about policy change, whether it's speaking out on social media, whatever any individual person can be doing to demonstrate solidarity with the cause right now is, I think, a responsibility we all have as Americans. My message to protesters is simply this. I stand with you, like so many others. Let's do this the right way. Let's not distract from our message or our cause. And let's do this peacefully. Let's do this civilly. Let's do this as dignified Americans. That's the best way to be effective. That's the best way to get our point across. It's not through violence. It's not through committing acts of arson. And unfortunately, that needs to be said, even though that last comment's only directed to a very discrete minority, a fringe element. That does not need to be said to the vast majority of protesters. What we're seeing out there is not indicative of the vast majority of people who are understandably outraged by what they've seen transpire.
With New York City's proximity to New Jersey, and we're right now getting news that New York City will have a curfew in place due to the destructions we've seen in the city in the last few days. Is there any worry of this protest widespreading to parts of New Jersey or Jersey City? Is there any concern in that regards?
Not right now. Right, the situation's being monitored. I haven't heard that as of yet, I have to say. And let me tell you something. In New Jersey, we are a sarcastic people. We are an angry people, but we are a tough people. We've been through a lot. We don't take BS from anybody. But if we can do this, if our response and our protests can be measured and civil as they have been, and nonviolent as they have been, there's no reason that everybody else in the country can't follow our lead in New Jersey. I'm very proud of New Jersey's protesters. We're a very diverse state. Yeah. We are as heartbroken as anybody else by what we've seen transpire. And we, as New Jerseyans, we have been protesting passionately
Yes.
But by and large, we've been doing it peacefully. And that's what I call on all Americans to do. That's how we can be the most effective at this crossroads.
Going to COVID-19 right now, with so much protest happening, there are concerns of a spike in cases again, which has been leveled off in several states. Right now, if there were some resources available through your office that our South Asian community can reach out to in terms of getting COVID assistance, in terms of getting resources, what should they know about?
Sure. So first of all, if you live in New Jersey,
Yes.
Going to the state's COVID-19 information hub is something that I encourage everybody to do. Refresh the page, check it regularly, whether you're an individual constituent, whether you're a business owner. The resources that are available are all listed there, including access to testing, access to economic opportunity assistance and things like that. That's covid19.nj.gov. Again, COVID-19, one word, no hyphen, .nj, like New Jersey.gov. And sure, we're flattening the curve. We still had over 1,000 additional cases yesterday, total of almost 160,000 cases in our state, over 11,000 deaths. I think the last count I saw was 11,531 deaths. So it's heartbreaking. There are nearly 3,000 COVID-19 hospitalizations as we speak. As of yesterday, 2,700 and change, 2,800. But it's a few less than the day before. So things are looking up if this holds. It's going to be up to all of us to make sure this holds. It's going to be up to all of us to continue to implement the social distancing measures that we have been taking up until now, to continue to wash our hands frequently, to watch our interactions, our physical contact with others, to make sure that even though we're restless and we're cooped up in our homes and our offices, for those of us that are essential, having to go to work only breaks up your day, your week a little bit.
Right.
We have to stick with it. We have to stick with it, or that trend's going to go in the reverse direction. That's the last thing we want to see happen right now.
Definitely. And in terms of the economic ramifications as well as the healthcare ramifications, I know the state is doing a lot. I'd like for you to give us an insight into this recent housing relief package that was worked on by you and a few others on the $100 million for rent relief. If you could give us some more information on that and your take on the impact on small businesses and the economic impact of COVID-19 on the state of New Jersey, and what should be handled right now, I think that'd be great.
Sure. The economic devastation, just like the entire pandemic, the public health crisis, is unprecedented. The hit to our state budget, to our revenues, it's catastrophic. In addition to how it's affecting people, their families, their household. I've had more constituents come to my legislative office for assistance with unemployment claims in the last 6 weeks than in the last 6 years put together.
Wow.
So it's a crisis of epic proportions. And those who are lucky enough to have gotten their unemployment claims paid or are eligible for unemployment or pandemic assistance or other types of relief if they're self-employed. Those small business owners that were able to get a benefit out of the EIDL relief program or the PPP loan program, those folks are still struggling to make rent and pay their groceries. It's unlike anything I've ever dealt with. It's heartbreaking. Every day I hear more heartbreaking stories and talking with some of my constituents. So we got a lot of work to do. Despite all of that, we must stay the course, in my view, of being prudent as to how and how quickly we reopen our economy. As harmful as that is to all of us economically, red must trump green here. Blood and the safety and the health and the well-being of our families in New Jersey and throughout the country must be a greater priority, as hard as that is to accept, than money and the economic injury that so many families are suffering right now. So I think that's the most important thing, and I think that my governor, Phil Murphy, and my neighboring governor, Andrew Cuomo, have done an extraordinary job as leaders during these difficult and unprecedented times to lead by example and to ensure that that is the way in which we are paving the eventual gradual reopening of our economy and our businesses and our stores and the activities that we all like to enjoy as Americans.
Right.
So you asked a couple more questions about specifically what we can be doing. The rental assistance program, which was a bill that I sponsored with Senator Stack and Assemblyman Raj Mukerji, and worked on that issue with the governor, and we've come up with an alternate model. But basically, it's $100 million, which isn't enough, which isn't nearly enough, but it's going to help. And it's mostly for Federal CARES Act funding. And it's going to create a short-term rental assistance program for qualifying New Jerseyans. That's going to be given to low and moderate income households that have had a substantial reduction in income as a result of the pandemic. And that includes people who are at risk of homelessness or have become homeless, and the lowest income families as well as homeless families get the highest priority, and they're going to be eligible for a year. They're going to be eligible for 12 months of housing assistance.
Wow.
And those who have somewhat higher of an income than the low income residents, the moderate income New Jerseyans, they're because we're not going to have enough money to help all of them. Unfortunately, the way that this is going to happen is we're going to open up an online lottery system in July. So that there's a fair but somewhat arbitrary way to allocate some measure of assistance to more families that we could capture than otherwise. And those individuals are going to be eligible for 6 months of rental assistance. If you make less than 80% of the median income within your county, or if you're unemployed, they're going to be focused on during the pandemic. Then you'll receive a higher priority or preference in the lottery. So the Department of Community Affairs and Lieutenant Governor Oliver is working on a program, and we'll hopefully have that implemented and the checks flowing by summer. We're also working on, we've got an eviction and foreclosure moratorium in our state. We are going to continue to work with community-based partners and the governor on ensuring that there are sufficient protections for tenants and to strengthen them so we can offer more protection than the governor could do by executive order. We have passed a variety of other legislation. We've passed a variety of legislation to help our state recover from the pandemic, and both from a public health standpoint as well as economically. Some of which I've sponsored, one ensuring that expecting mothers have the protection of having a support person during labor and delivery, which is something that CDC and World Health Organization guidelines recommend. The science backs up that compassionate and appropriate right of an expecting mother. Most hospitals were abiding that philosophy. We had a few that I understand were stuck in a very difficult position and went with a decision that we don't think the science supported. That's when it's time for government to step in and ensure that our policy protects that right of an expecting mother. So that is now law. I appreciate the governor signing it. We've extended deadlines for property tax appeals. We've extended certain conveniences so that people can continue to conduct business, get documents notarized virtually, as well as for governments to conduct their businesses, their public hearings and things like that, and fulfill requirements using technology in order to avoid requiring people to violate social distancing mandates or to have to go in person when it isn't really necessary, and when we have technology that would allow you another way, but bureaucracy stopped it. So updating the law to, kind of stay with the times. Allowing the EDA to create new emergency grants and loans for small businesses, something that affects the South Asian community, particularly in the hospitality industry.
Definitely.
So I think we have a $50 million loan program that the EDA has announced that I was happy to work with the governor's office to champion. And hopefully that will provide some small measure of relief. Again, it's not nearly enough, but to those small businesses. The financial relief, just preserving what economic stability we still have, that's important. Trying to help people get through the pandemic and make sure that they're best positioned to get back on their feet once we get through this and figure out what our new normal is going to be.
I just have a few questions left here in our interview. What is your focus for the next few weeks? There are so many things happening in the nation, and you are an assemblyman. There's a lot that's, relying on all of you right now as well. What is your focus going to be? What is something that really needs attention right now as we're speaking?
Sure. Ensuring that we're helping constituents with their individual problems. If they can't get through to the Department of Labor, if a constituent can't get through to the Department of Labor because they can't get through on the phone or the computer system crashes or something like that, making sure that we're assisting with that. If we had a landlord, despite the eviction moratorium, affix a dispossession notice and scare this elderly couple, their tenants, just a week or two ago, making sure my constituents know the resources that are available to them, helping people just figure out what the executive order means, helping businesses figure out how to cope, how to comply. These are our, I think, highest priorities from a day-to-day standpoint. Then making sure I'm working with my colleagues in the legislature and the Senate, working with leadership, working with the governor to make sure that our policies and our responses to COVID-19 are quick, are effective, are publicly communicated so that the information is out there, expanding testing capacity, looking at what's needed for effective contact tracing, ensure that people of color and minority communities, including Asian immigrants and South Asian immigrants, have access to healthcare and attacking affordability and racial discrimination and language barriers and all the other issues that are going to get in the way of adequate medical care for disenfranchised or disadvantaged communities. It's of particular importance to me as an urban legislator. I think those are some of the priorities for us. Dealing with the socioeconomic inequalities, even in terms of who's affected by the virus and how they're affected by the virus. It's distressing.
Assemblyman, I really appreciate you for your time here on ITV Gold. I'd love for you to give out a message to all of the ones that are on the front line right now and all of the healthcare workers that are working so tirelessly every single day to save lives, and also a message out to our community here on ITV Gold. I think that'll be great.
Sure. I have to tell you, and I think that there are a lot of South Asian Americans on the front lines right now as healthcare heroes, as well as essential workers, our heroes at gas stations, at convenience stores and essential businesses, grocery stores, supermarkets, in hospitals and ambulatory care facilities and surgery centers and nursing homes, in journalism, in government, anybody who has to put themselves in harm's way by going to work, by being on by taking public transportation, folks who are doing their part even from their homes, but are staying home, are following the rules, are doing their part. You're all on the front lines. We, our country, this planet, will always be in debt to you. We owe you our appreciation, our gratitude, and this is difficult for everybody, but we got to stick it out together. And in terms of immigrant communities, minority communities, I know you're outraged. I'm outraged. But if we as an immigrant community, just like any other minority community, don't secure for ourselves a seat at the table, we are going to be on the menu. So the follow-up to that is, just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you. So not just while maybe you have a little bit extra time while working from home, or while unemployed or furloughed or whatever the situation may be, when you have a little more time to do this. But even afterwards, even after we find our new normal, you have to make sure you're involved in the political process, that you're speaking out, that you're not just observing from the sidelines. You have to make sure you take an active role in your democracy, whether it's by voting, if that's the only thing you have time to do, is voting a couple times a year in the primary and the general, every year, not just every 4 years, every single year there's an election everywhere in our country. So voting every year and reading the news and keeping yourself apprised of what's going on in your community and in the world. State and local news is harder and harder to come by. Don't just watch television news, read the news, and know what's going on in your community. But vote. If that's as little as you can do, I'll take it. But most people don't even do that. But if you can participate in your government, volunteer on your library board, on your planning board, on your local COVID-19 task force, and lend your expertise to your community in that way. Run for office, serve in appointed office. However you can do it,
Right.
Make sure that you're participating, because that's the only way that we're going to see change.